Signing in with Google or any social provider is going to be a great way to make sure that you have a streamlined authentication experience for your users. Sure, you can do username and password with Cognito, just like how we have done in other episodes. But when you sign in with a social provider, it's just so much better, especially when it comes to building a micro SaaS because you have one less friction point in your application. Now, before we dive deep, I do want to apologize. I am super tired right now. I'm speaking at a conference, Magnolia JS, later on this week. So my flight actually leaves in a couple hours, so it's 5 a.m. my time. But because I love you all, I thought I'd crank out this video. Now what we have here is just your regular NextJS application, nothing too crazy. But if I slide over to the code, you can see in our application here, we have a basic NextJS application on the right-hand side. And then we have our CDK backend on the left. Now all I did right now was just scaffold these out, except for two parts of the front end. One, I installed the Amplify libraries, both the JavaScript libraries and the React components, and then imported the CSS file. And then number two, if you can see up top, we have this with authenticator, and this is going to automatically give us authentication. So if I scroll all the way down from this Next.js boilerplate, you can see that we have our export default, but I'm going to comment this out and then put in this other part. And this is going to be what Amplify libraries expect, right? We have with authenticator, pass in the component that we're working with. We tell it, hey, also give me the ability to sign in with email. And then for the social providers, we're going to allow Google. Now watch what happens when I save here. I will do a save. This is going to refresh. And then just like that, we have authentication set up. Perfect, we're done. Not quite. Even though we have this set up, this is just the front end. This is just UI, sort of a facelift, right? But if I sign in with Google or even try to do the username and password, it's just going to spin because nothing is configured. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be configuring the backend so that it can take advantage of these UI components. So if that sounds good to you, let's go and get started before I miss my flight. So instead of passing parameters down throughout your different constructs, one common method to repurpose your code is to enable a context. Now, to show you what that looks like, it's better if I just paste this in. And what I'll do is in the root of my CDK project, I'm going to create a new file. This is going to be called a cdk.context.json file. And inside of here, I'll paste in all of the props that my application will be expecting. So far, this is just an object that is saying, hey, I'm going to have some auth props. And then you can see within here, we have Google and then the attributes that Google would expect. Now, I'm going to be passing this through my application, but I want IntelliSense as I do that. So I'm actually going to come right back over here and then create a context.d.ts so I can have some type definitions. And then all I have to do is just paste this in. So now I have my actual auth types right here. And then of course, I'll export these types so that way I can use them in my application. To see what that looks like in action, let's go ahead and create a new file here. And we're going to call this auth, and then we'll say /cognito.ts. Here, I'm just going to create the stub for my auth service so that way I can go ahead and pass in those props and then come back in here to flesh it out. Okay, so this is pretty bare bones, but that's all we need for the time being. Let's head back into our backend stack, clean up this boilerplate code, and then import our new function. Awesome. Now, this function is going to expect all those auth props that we declared in our context. So how do we pull those? Well, the cool thing is that the CDK comes with a built-in way of gathering those, and it does so by looking for that specially named file. So what I can say here is auth context is going to equal this dot node dot try to get the context, and then what we specifically called it was auth. Just wanted to do a quick double check here. In that JSON file, you can see that we have auth here. Now, on its own, it doesn't know anything about the types associated with this. You can see if I say auth context and then do a dot here, nothing pulls up. So what we can do is a quick typecasting and say that this is of type auth context. And then inside of here, now you can note that we have Google dot, and then we can get into all the fields that we need. Pretty cool, but I obviously have this poorly named variable here. So let me switch this real quick. And a typical name is going to be CDK context, just like that. Now this CDK context is going to take in all of those props. We're actually going to hold tight on this variable here because over in our actual construct, let's assign the props as we start to flesh out exactly what we need. First up is going to be our app name. Now we can actually pass this in on our context as well, but I'm going to stick it right here and we'll just pass it in as a regular string from our backend -stack file. And then the first construct that we're going to make use of is going to be a Cognito user pool, and that can be created just like this. So if you've seen some of my last videos, you know how this works, where we have our user pool construct being brought in. We give it a name based off of the app name, and then we let our user set up their username and password according to these specific rules right here, including account recovery and things like that. Now, so far, this doesn't have anything to do with Google. So let's check the first thing off of our list by giving this a user pool domain name. I'm going to scroll down right here, and then I'll paste in the code that we need. Now, domain name is really great because it's super easy to configure. You give it the user pool, and then you say, hey, for the Cognito domain URL, just set a prefix for me, and I will take care of the rest. That's one item off of our list. So the next thing is to start configuring some Google stuff. First up is we're going to imagine, and we haven't done this yet, but we're going to do it in a little bit, where we have a secret set up in Secrets Manager, and this is going to be our Google client secret. Now, obviously, we don't want to store this in our code if we're committing this to GitHub, so we're going to store it there, read the value here, and then pass this into a newly formed Google provider. This provider is going to be the thing that Cognito needs to have Google interactivity set up. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to scroll up a little bit so we have some room and then paste in our details. Okay, so first things first, we're going to access this value from AWS Secrets Manager. And again, we'll store that value in just a little bit. I'm going to scroll up top because we have props coming in, and I specifically prefixed it with Google in case we wanted to add in something like Facebook or Amazon or whatever down the line. So let's get this going here. We have Google.client secret name right up top. So we'll say Google and then client secret name. And the cool thing is that you can see in Code Whisper automatically configuring this for me. So then down at the bottom, we imagine a scenario where we have this listed already, and then we set this up as a provider from within Cognito. And that's going to be taken care of by this aptly named user pool identity provider Google construct. We give it the app name, and then we give it the details that we're working with. What's the client ID for Google, the client secret that we just pulled off, and then what are some of the scopes that we're going to be needing for our application. These are the common ones: OpenID, profile, and email. From there, it maps those attributes to the user pool that we created. Now this creates the provider. Then we go ahead and just register it so that way it is a part of our actual user plan. And I know it may seem a little redundant, but it's just the way that things have to be set up. When we create our Google provider, we tell it that we're working with this specific user pool, but then we also have to register it. And this is a line that I just see folks forgetting quite often. From here, the rest is pretty much the same as usual, where we create our user pool client and then associate that with an identity pool. So that way Cognito knows all this provider stuff is going to be used in a front-end application. Nothing too crazy. It works much like a regular user pool client would. The one thing to note is that we do have the option to add in this OAuth flow. So we tell it, hey, what is the authorization code grant? And then what are the callback URLs that we are working with? Now we actually don't have this set up in props either. So I'm going to scroll up and see if Code Whisper is going to automatically configure this for us as well. And I just gave it a moment, and there we go. Now, the very last thing that we need before we call this good is we can hop down here, give ourselves some room, and then we'll set up our identity provider, and this will give us all the permissioning for our application. Now, here is the code, but I am getting some red squigglies, and the reason being is because I need to install the actual currently alpha construct for an identity pool. The regular one is low level, so I want to use this alpha version that I'm going to install just like that. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the right folder, and then I will install this construct. Now we created a bunch of things in here just to sort of wrap it all up. Is I'm going to return this. So note that we have our user pool. The user pool is going to be tied to a front-end application, and we associate that by creating a user pool client. Now, because we are authenticating with Google, we create this domain so that way Google can have something to call back to. And then for permissioning, we have our identity pool. That is sort of the full mix that we have going on in our application. The last thing to do before we call this good is head over to our backend stack, and I'm just going to paste in the props that we have. Nothing too crazy. We saw how this works in our CDK context file. Just to take a quick refresher on that is I can head over to that file here, and we have a client secret name and a client ID that we have to get from Google before we can actually deploy this. Now, in terms of the callback URLs, I can associate those with my application. So I can say HTTP localhost 3000. And then just to make sure you don't get tripped up, you do want to add in a backslash on both of these. And then of course, when it comes to the callback URLs, you can go to, slash pricing or logout, slash logout, however you want to handle that. So we essentially have a two-step phase here. where we're going to head over to Google, gather this client secret name and client ID, store the secret name in Secrets Manager, deploy our backend application, which is going to generate a Cognito domain, and then we have to head back to Google to tell it what that domain is. All right, so this UI actually changes all the time. I'm over at developers.google.com, and what I'm going to do is create a brand new application or a brand new project here for us. It looks like there's only so many I can make. That's okay. I'm going to say sample Cognito just for that, and then we can create this. Once this project gets created, make sure that you're actually viewing that project. It doesn't sometimes automatically switch over if it's in the process of creating. So I can create some credentials here. I have my OAuth client ID, and then now I can configure essentially what is my consent screen, which is saying this is going to be using for external users. And then I can go in and create this. And then it'll ask me some basic details regarding the scopes, etc. I'm going to go ahead and go through it, and I'll show you what I got. All right, note that everything doesn't have to be filled out exactly. I gave it an app name. My support email automatically populated because this is my Google account. And then for the authorized domains, I left this blank for now, and I'm going to click on save and continue. Oh, it looks like I do need at least one email in here. I'm going to go ahead and use my Gmail account since it already has that in place. The next screen is going to be what scopes, meaning what data points are we trying to access within Google once they authenticate? What information does it want to give back to us? So I can say add or remove scopes. And if I look back into my backend stack, it looks like the ones that we were asking for are OpenID, profile, and email. So I want to make sure that these are given to us. And then with OpenID in the profile, it'll automatically give us this information right here, which is how Google needs to map that back to Cognito. So I'm going to say right in here, we have email, profile, and OpenID. It's nice that those are the first three listed. Those are super common to have. And then once I have that, I can update right here. Now, no additional auth checks need to happen because these are super common to have in any application. So from here, I can actually save and continue. When it comes to test users, I always like to add in myself. I'm not exactly sure if that's required or not, but I like to add myself just in case. The last part is going to be a quick summary of everything that we have in our application. Again, note the fields that I have here. Feel free to pause the video. But with that, I'm going to head back to the dashboard. And with everything in place, I can go ahead and publish. So I have this application, it's published. Now, obviously, if you're still testing and wanting to work some of this out, feel free to go ahead and disregard that part. But because I didn't need any restrictive permissioning, it's actually quite easy to get an application set up with Google. So with that consent screen in place, I'm actually in a pretty good spot to create some credentials here. So I can say, I'm going to create an OAuth client ID. This is going to be for a web application, and I can give this a name. Now, something simple is fine, because this name is not going to be what we store in Secrets Manager. It's going to be something else. Now, the part that actually matters are going to be these authorized JavaScript origins. Now, Google isn't going directly to our application. It can't go directly to localhost, right? We set up Cognito as the intermediary to handle all of this. So when it comes to the authorized JavaScript origin and that redirect URI, we want to have that go to our domain that we set up within Cognito. So we're going to come back to this, right? Because we don't have that information just yet. So I can actually click on create here. You can see I have the parts that I need. I have my client ID and I have my client secret. Now, this client secret you don't want to share with anybody. You definitely don't want to zoom in on screen when you're recording a YouTube video and forget to delete it. So I will be deleting this. But we have the client ID, which is public facing. But again, you don't want to just hand that out to anybody. So I'm actually going to take these values, this client ID at least, and I'm going to take this and come over to our application. Now, in our CDK context file, we have the client ID field right here, right? Cool. Heading back over to Google, this is what I'm going to be storing in Secrets Manager. So I'm going to copy this and meet you in the AWS console. Okay, so here in the console, let me bump this up one time for us. You see we have Secrets Manager right here, or you can type it in at the very top of this bar. Now, once I click on this, you can see I already have a Google client secret in place, and this is one that I use in my actual testing applications. But to create it from scratch, let's say that we're going to store a new secret, and we can say that this is going to be an other type. We'll go to plain text, and we'll paste in our secret value. This is what we just generated from Google, right? Then I can click on next here, and then for the secret name, this is going to be the name that you put inside of our CDK application. So because I already have one called Google Client Secret, I'm just gonna add a number 2 on here. And then with that in place, make sure you copy that because we're gonna need it shortly here. We can select on next. not enable automatic rotation, and then go ahead and get this all set up and stored. Now over in our application, let me just refresh to make sure that it's here. Cool. Over in our application, when it comes to this client secret name, this is what we're going to be pasted in, that right there. So you can see we never have to paste in any sensitive content. And now we have everything that we need to deploy our application. So let's open up our terminal here, clear everything out, and then I'm just going to run our deploy command once I get down to one terminal. So as we talk about on this channel, you can see all the permissions that the CDK is going to generate for us. We have two roles being created, the authenticated role and the unauthenticated role. From here, I'm going to go ahead and select yes. Now it looks like it was trying to deploy, and I do want to make sure that I keep this in the video here. Our domain can't contain a reserved word Cognito. So I'm going to head back up here. And when it comes to our domain, where are you at? Right here, you can see that it's being derived from our app name. So let's head back over to our backend stack. And we need to remove this Cognito with Google Auth. And with that in place, we should be all good. Now, I was actually going to do this next part as a secondary step post our deployment, but since we're here, I'm actually going to paste in some CFN outputs so that way we can see the actual values that are being generated. In particular, we're going to need some of these for our front-end application anyways, so it makes sense to go ahead and grab them now. But Google is still waiting on us to get that user pool domain URL. This is going to be found within the AWS docs, and unfortunately, it's not the easiest thing to find, so it's great to have this in code, where Google is going to need our domain name and special suffixes appended to it, specifically the domain name, but then also .auth plus the region, and then .amazoncognito.com. Again, this is one of those things that can kind of give Cognito a bad rap, where the documentation for this is a little bit hidden, but once you have it in code, you honestly never have to think about it again. The other part is going to be that domain name .auth plus the region, but then we're going to give it a special OAuth 2 IDP response. And I'll show you in the Google console where we need to go ahead and place these values. But with that in place, let's go ahead and try deploying this again, just so we can get this up and running. Okay, I just deployed and it looks like it's still not working. And I actually automatically see my mistake here. I have HTTP:// localhost 3000. Unfortunately, that is definitely not going to work. I need my double slashes in there. Sorry if you guys caught that ahead of time and you were screaming at me. But let's go ahead and get this taken care of. But it is a good indication of what you see when you do make a mistake. So I'll get 2 slashes on both of these. Go ahead and clear this out. And then now we can go ahead and deploy, and this should be working just fine for us now. Looks like it's going through just fine. And again, that's what I love about recording these videos is I try to keep those errors in, because that is going to be exactly what you would encounter if you were to be making those same mistakes. All right, so without too much trouble, we were able to get that taken care of here. Now, we do have a couple domains that we have printed out for us, which is super cool. It's exactly what we want. I'm going to take this and try to get some room here and copy both of these. Now, in particular, I'm going to need this one. I noticed that I forgot to put https://. I'll have to make sure I add that. But I'm going to copy this. And then I have the IDP response that I was mentioning that we need earlier. So I'm actually going to copy this one as well. So the last part to get this wired up, where Google is aware of what we have with Cognito, we can come in here and then prefix this with http://. Let me bump that up for you. And then paste in that value. And this is going to be working for our authorized JavaScript URL here. Now it's probably complaining because I forgot the S. There we go. And then for the authorized redirect, we can come down here and paste in that IDP response just like so. Now I can save that, but keep in mind, like it says, it does take a couple minutes for all of this to propagate. But now we have Cognito integrated with Google, and Google is aware of what we have with Cognito in addition to those logout URLs. So I'm going to head back over to our front-end application, tell the Amplify libraries what our backend credentials are, and then test this out. Okay, so I have these values pasted in, and again, this is going to be the root of my application. In a NextJS app, it's going to be your _app.tsx, but I'm going to give it the region and then essentially all of my auth credentials here, so it knows where to find my exact user pool, identity pool, and etc. The gotcha that I often see though is that this domain with Amplify libraries will automatically get prefixed with HTTPS. So you don't want to put on that prefix there. Otherwise you have sort of HTTPS:// HTTPS, and then the rest of this stuff. It'll get set correctly for you by Amplify. The rest are just going to be the scopes that our front-end application needs, and then those redirects. Now in production, you obviously want to dynamically update these redirect and signouts. So that way on localhost or in dev, it is localhost, and then in prod, it is your actual website. Just make sure that you update those values in Google. So that way it is aware of where to be sending back that response token. Now let's test this out real quick. So I'm going to say npm run dev. All right, so here's our beautiful Google account. Now sign in and create account are actually going to do the same thing, but I'm going to click on create account here, click on sign up with Google. And you can see we're taken to our Google account. And now it even says, with Amazon Cognito, do you want to sign in? I'm going to click on my account here. Phew, and there we go. That was actually a single shot try here. I have to leave and go to the airport. But with that, thank you so much for joining. I got to head out, but I'll check you all next time. Peace.